Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the third seminar. I'm just going to wait a few minutes so that so more people can join us. So bear with us where we just wait a few seconds. Oh, lovely. This is excellent. It's great to see so many participants. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you all for joining us this evening and taking the time out. It's really a wonderful thing that we can do this now. So this is the last one of 3 webinars organized by KLC on the topic of time for change. And in this session, we are going to discuss health, well-being and hygiene in interiors in a pandemic world. So I hope you can all see at the bottom of your bar, there's a Q&A and a chat line. So as we go along and introduce ourselves and talk about the subject matter, it would be fantastic if all of you could forward your comments in your chats as we go along. And then at the end, we'll try and get through as many as possible. So let me start with a quick introduction of my panel that's here. So we have a very varied and multidisciplinary panel here. So let me start with, so at one end, let's see, we've got Christopher Shaw, who's an architect. Yeah, thank you, Chris. Then we've got Alice Green, who's an architect as well. And then, oh, Mary Louise, you need to, oh, there's Mary Louise, who's a landscape architect. And then we've got Rebecca Weir, who's a lighting designer, and also Adrienne Chinn, who's a interior designer. So a nice varied panel of people. So let me just start with a quick introduction of myself. So I'm a healthcare architect and I've been practicing over 20 years, designing healthcare buildings around the world, and something I dearly love to do. And over the last 10 years, I would say, I've specialized in designing and delivering acute healthcare facilities, so large scale hospitals. Last year, I completed my PhD in surgical environments and medical technologies, which is a passion of mine. And since then, I've been working for Penroy and Prasad Architects as an architect on the new Moorfields Eye Hospital, and which is a collaboration between themselves and the Institute of Ophthalmology. And as no surprise, this has come to a bit of a standstill in some ways because of the whole crisis situation. And at the moment, they're rethinking a lot of their strategies on how to actually adapt with the pandemic situation. So anyway, I will talk more about that project later. Recently, I've just joined the other side of the fence, which is Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust as a healthcare planner. And this is a new role which I've just taken on board, and I'm quite excited because we're looking at the Paddington Basin and all new projects around that site, including St. Mary's Hospital. So that's me in a nutshell. But so I think what would be great if I could ask each of my panelists to introduce themselves and maybe mention a project or something of interest that is relevant to the current situation we're in. So Adrienne, would you like to begin?
Sure. Hi, I'm Adrienne Chinn. I'm an interior designer. I run my own business. Have been doing it for over 20 years. I trained at KLC many years ago. And I have been spending a lot of time before the pandemic working on residential projects. I had a large one about to start at the beginning of April, which has been postponed. So that's still being postponed. I was teaching in China, had been teaching in China for the past 2 years, interior design, part-time, a few times a year. So that's been put on hold as you can imagine, and have also been doing some work for KLC School of Design. We were just about to have a special 3-day short course on health and well-being in interiors run the week that everything was locked down in March. So we had to pull the plug on that one for March, but I've been looking at it subsequently to what's been happening through the pandemic and how that is affecting how interior design is looking to go in the future. And we'll be more than likely putting together a new version of the health and well-being in interiors course, which will be looking at some of the hygiene and mental health design resolutions that we can take in interior design. So that's been quite interesting. I've been spending time doing that. And the other thing is, well, I've been writing and just finished a 3rd novel. So that's my sideline. So I've had some time to do that. So I've just done that.
Thank you, Adrienne. Rebecca, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, good evening. My name is Rebecca Weir, also an alumni of KLC, and I've been running Light IQ for over 20 years now, which is very exciting. We have a team of almost 20, and we are operating and working on projects all over the world. And an exciting part of the pandemic actually has been some of the research into lighting and how it can assist. And actually some of it is quite old technology, such as UVC lighting and things like that. But actually there's been a renaissance, there's been a lot of interest. So we've got that side of the business, which is quite interesting. And I have some colleagues in the industry who are sort of picking my brains and looking at ideas. So it's quite exciting. And then we've got the other side, which is our luxury lifestyle, which is where we do most of the design on projects such as high-end hotels, residential, retail boutiques, etc. And of course, there's an enormous interest in the importance of lighting. And as we've spent more time in our homes, I think people have really understood and realized actually where well-being and lighting suddenly start to play a really important role. So some of the little things that maybe might have niggled people in the past, like not having really good task lighting, or actually not feeling particularly comfortable in their home. And actually, how can you make an environment where you do feel comfortable and it is conducive? And then thinking about lighting and well-being, you know, how do we shut off at the end of the day when we're spending so much of our time on Zoom calls and things like that? You know, at what point do we really need to put away the computer? So, you know, lighting is integral to every aspect of our lives. And the pandemic has only heightened that and its importance and its role in our well-being. So, you know, actually it's been a very, very exciting time because we've had a little bit of space to think, and also to think of a little bit broader about how we can help our clients.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's really interesting. Alice, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name's Alice Green. I'm a qualified interior designer and also qualified architect. So I transferred my degree in interior design over to a part 1 in architecture, and then took an external exam with the ARB in London and supplemented my portfolio. So it's not a usual route to take into architecture, but it just so happened that it ended up that way for me. And I've been practicing, specialising in healthcare for about 12 years now. And a couple of projects that I'm working on at the moment, I work at a company called P&HS Architects. I think about 80% of what we do is healthcare and the other 20% is residential. And we're starting to cross over between the sectors to do extra care and dementia care as well. A couple of projects that I'm working on at the moment. We're working on a very large scheme at Airedale Hospital. It's 85,000 square metres of new build hospital. We're at a stage where we're trying to acquire funding, and we're just waiting at the moment to see whether that will go ahead. Another scheme that we're running at the moment is at Bradford Mental Health, and that's another very large scheme. Again, we're waiting for funding. But what's interesting about the Bradford scheme is we're working on some enabling works, which is a small project to enable the wider scheme to take part. And we're having to do minor bits of redesign to accommodate the changes that are taking place due to the pandemic. So we've had to incorporate an isolation suite. It's a centre for autism in just this small part of the enabling works. And although social distancing we know will be a real challenge because of the nature of the care that's given in that department, in order to protect as far as they can other patients, we've created a small area that's got its separate own entrance, a bedroom and a day space, just for one patient on the off chance that somebody came in and they were unsure whether they'd been exposed to COVID or if they came down with symptoms. And another scheme that we're working on is a headquarters for Sheffield Health and Social Care. So it's their entire offices. It's for about 300 staff. It's quite a large scheme. And that's completely gone on hold while we redesign it in consideration of COVID. And we're looking at redesigning some of the desk layouts, how we can future-proof it too, so that when things go back to normal, we can also cope with the future capacity when people maybe don't always work from home. But at the moment, we're taking into consideration that quite a large percentage of them will now be working from home. So hopefully that's interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Alice. That is very interesting. Quite a number of projects you've got on there as well. So keeping you busy, right? Christopher, would you like to introduce yourself? Chris, you're on
right, okay, I'll see if I can demute myself. Okay, well, hello everybody. My name's Christopher Shaw. I'm a principal in a company called Medical Architecture, which should give you one or two clues. And I'm also the chair of Architects for Health, of which a lot of people here seem to be members, which is great. So I wasn't trained at KLC. I actually went to Cheltenham Art College, almost taking Alice's route, actually. I tried to get into landscape architecture, and architecture was a poor second choice. And in fact, I've been trying to transfer to landscape ever since, unsuccessfully. So I sort of ended up in doing architecture in an art college, which has long since closed down. And then years later, sort of stumbled into the Medical Architecture Research Unit, which in those days was at London Met University. And then in about 30 years ago, we all lost our jobs because the university was sort of closing everything down. So I ended up founding a company, which I say to this day, was founded in the middle of a recession on the basis of it was better than signing on with dole rather than entrepreneurial zeal. So the company was really set up as a sort of mechanism to keep people in jobs. And I think that's the way we run it ever since. It's a bit of an employment scheme for all sorts of very interesting people. So the company is, as I think some of the panel will know, we've got offices in Newcastle on Tyne in the north of England, and London, where I'm based, in the south of England. And at one stage in our history, we also had offices in Sydney in Australia and Toronto. We were very, very global at one stage, but then recessions hit and we shrunk back. The company specialises in designing hospitals and bits of hospitals, mostly in the UK. bits and pieces around the world, Europe, Canada, Australia, one or two projects in Africa. Some of those are huge. We've got projects which are nearly £1 billion in size, which seem to be moving very slowly, and others are tiny. I mean, we've got reception desks to design and things like that. So very varied, which is I think interesting, fun, keeps you busy. I'll just give two examples recently of kind of work. I got involved in March in a piece of work preparing the standard pandemic, or what was it called, novel coronavirus standard operating procedure for the NHS home nations. Sounds really boring, in fact was mostly pretty boring, but it had its exciting moments because it was the standard way that hospitals needed to adapt to cater for pandemics. So I had all these sort of weird FaceTime calls with people converting the Excel center. Just, how do we do it? Where does this go? How big is it? And it was you really felt you were at the cutting edge for a few days there. Everybody was collaborating. That was an interesting, good piece of work, and there are bits that are ongoing. And then just to go from to another extreme, we've just finished doing a piece of work designing a hospital in the Ascension Islands. So this is a tiny blip in the middle of the South Atlantic, population 800, unless Priti Patel gets her way and fills it up with asylum seekers. And absolutely fascinating. The challenge was, how do you get a hospital there in bits? And there isn't a harbour, so you have to manhandle bits of a hospital up a beach and then assemble it, and it has to work as a hospital. So those are the kind of extremes of the things I get involved in.
Thank you, Chris. That's wonderful. I never knew you had so many different offices all over the place, actually. Mary Louise, are you with us? Would you like to introduce yourself? Thanks.
I am. I'm parked up in a service station, and so I do the landscape. So from Chris's perspective, I actually do the landscape architecture. I am, just to be different, alumni of KLC, and to all intents and purposes, our world didn't stop that much during the pandemic because construction sites stayed open, and external works more than internal works were very compliant with social distancing. Man in digger, man in dumper, man in lorry driving excavating material away is about as socially distanced working as you can get. And the sort of clients that we work for want to get their jobs done. So, construction sites, once they had worked out how to comply safely with all COVID regulations, pretty much carried on as best they possibly could. We have a diverse range. So I've got a practice, a partnership with a chap called Michael Balston, who actually trained as an architect as well. And I had done a bit of contracting after KLC as well. So we sort of span the board in terms of design, contracting, architecture, and all the rest of it. And landscape architecture is a very multidisciplinary career sort of anyway. And we obviously work very closely with architects because inside and outside and the setting of the building and everything else like that is absolutely paramount to what we deliver. I suppose in terms of an interesting project that it had pretty much sort of come to completion at the time that COVID hit, but it was an interesting, I suppose, sort of healthcare related, was we worked on one of the new Maggie's centres with Heatherwick Studios up at Leeds. And that was interesting because obviously as a practice, you're considering not only the sort of setting of the building and the vision that the studio had for the aesthetics, but obviously you were considering the sort of the mental well-being and the experience of the users of that building. People from the shock of receiving the news that you might be being diagnosed with cancer, and that ability to have somewhere within the landscape that you can just sort of sit and gather your thoughts, because the centre has got a very direct relationship to where the oncology unit is at St James's Hospital. So you would have sort of had your appointment with your consultant, and then you might be sort of they had another appointment to go to, so then you're sort of let out and you're processing it. And so there was sort of the concept of how you how you travel through the landscape, how you stop, how you collect your thoughts, and things like that. But then also for people who are going to be hopefully using the centre for quite some time as they go through their treatment, and therefore experientially what they see. And we ended up using a scheme, or having a scheme, that was based around British native woodland, which of course is very seasonal. And actually the seasons are something that for most people are so evocative, and so personal, and people who then would set themselves goals. I want to see the snowdrops next year, I want to see the autumn colors and stuff like that, and the changing seasons became something that they would actually would almost become part of the sort of the treatment. They would set themselves targets. I want to see this, I want to see that, I want to see, and so on and so forth. So that was very interesting. And of course I think we heard a lot of it on the news, but people just, anyone that we knew, anyone that you guys would know as well, I would sort of say that the outdoor space has become even more valuable for people than it was previously. As soon as you say to somebody, you can go out for an hour a day, suddenly people are sort of looking out the window and actually what is outside and what is going on, and not only physically working in the gardens and their external spaces, but people actually became so much more engaged with their external spaces. They actually saw it on a day-to-day basis, whereas before they'd probably got up, gone to work possibly when it was dark, come back when it was dark, get to see the garden at the weekend, but not that much of it. People were much more engaged with their external spaces. So it's, the dialogue has remained very open, both with clients, with press, with colleagues, with friends, all throughout.
Well, thank you, Mary Louise. That is really interesting. The fact that we have changed in terms of our habits, and like you said, the seasonal aspect has actually made us more aware of our environments as well. So that's very interesting. So as a chair, I get to ask the first question, and then I'll go on to the rest of the Q&A and chats. And please, as the audience, please put forward your questions. We'd like to hear from you, or even if you have comments, that'd be quite nice as well. So I think just to start this discussion off, I think one of the things that's quite dear to me as well is I've been thinking about what strategies we as designers could start identifying or start focusing on to reduce risk and to kind of enhance comfort and release stress. I mean, I know those are three very different things, but I think we're talking about the same things in the sense of it's how we can improve the environment, knowing what we've been through now. So maybe, would you like to start, Marie Louise?
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly when it comes to external spaces, thinking within designs as to how people are going to travel around a space, how you make people feel comfortable within a space is something that we will probably focus on more when it comes to seating areas, whether they are individual seating areas where people can go and, we say socially distant now. I don't think, God willing, this is something that is going to evolve and we will move forward. But I think that people, certainly for a long while to come, are going to be thinking about proximity to other people quite a lot. So I think that externally we have probably more opportunity to play with that than you might do sometimes in a more confined space. And invariably it will then be sort of how you divide those spaces up, the sort of quintessential garden room, but how you create spaces that have their own intimacy but are part of a larger space, a sort of collection of spaces that you can travel between.
That's really interesting. So we're talking about looking at different external spaces and the distances between them, and also creating private spaces as well as communal spaces, I guess, but equally still maintaining that social distance. Yeah,
I think so.
I was wondering, Mary Louise, has
Rebecca
asked to bring the garden inside more? Have you seen any requests for more interior planting, sort of biophilic design permeate through from the outside?
Mm-hmm.
People have always, with a lot of modern design, which very much where glass is used much more in designs, the inside and the outside have a very direct relationship with each other. And certainly at the Maggie's Centre up in Leeds, Heatherwicks were very keen to transition between the interior and the exterior. Invariably, interior plants and the whole sort of horticultural conditions of interior plants are so unbelievably different to anything exterior. Then you have quite an interesting design juxtaposition between actually how things look and how things read together and how things marry together. But certainly within the centre up at Leeds, there are an enormous amount of houseplants and internal plants all over the centre. And clearly that is something that was and we did talk about it, and it was considered right at the point of design, almost and that was before all of this all of the pandemic happened.
I think I've noticed that a lot of my clients, this kind of prevalence of much more interior planting over the last 5 months. So I think people are trying to connect to nature much more readily.
Absolutely.
Yes, I would say that certainly for residential interior design, the interest in plants, we're starting to see things like incorporated interior planters, like you used to have in the 60s. There was a big trend for those in the 60s. Room dividers with plants in them, that kind of thing. And when you talk about the mix of space, social space and individual space, I think what we're going towards in interior design is a real need for flexible space. So to have the ability to divide up space, perhaps in a temporary way, and then being able to open it up again when we want to have the social aspect of the family. But because so many people have been at home with their children and extended families, there's been a real need to find private space, in order to be able to do your tasks, for the kids to do their homework, for you to have your Zoom calls. And this isn't really workable in an open plan space. So this is a big change, I think, in interior design and residential, is to be able to have flexible space.
So do you think that there's a strategy there that we could implement or investigate in that would enable, the development of screens, or the,
absolutely
pod-like spaces or something?
Yeah, well, because I work mainly residentially, so definitely sliding screens, things like the Japanese sliding screens, these kind of things that can move easily, folding screens, even just freestanding folding screens, room dividers, bookshelves that can be placed with plants and books, so it's not a full division, but just a psychological division of it between space. So I think we need to be looking at those kind of things more in our interiors.
So, I mean, this is open to the panel. Do you think these strategies of flexibility, as a healthcare architect, I know flexibility and adaptability are key strategies within designing a hospital, but as interior designers, it's very difficult to do that at a smaller scale. So, Alice, would you want to comment? Or?
Yeah, I think what Mary Louise was saying earlier also can extend to interiors. I think people moving forward and generally like a choice of places to sit. And I think, as maybe the pandemic lifts, people might still feel uncomfortable sitting close to one another, but you want a nice balance of, I walked into a GP surgery a few weeks ago where placed individual chairs. It looked like moving musical chairs. It was done in a very ugly way, and there's much better ways of socially distancing seating and interiors as well. And you're right, in terms of for healthcare, flexibility I think is more of a sort of semi-permanent solution, rather than, you can't just be moving flimsy screens around regularly. And planters in hospitals, I'd love to see that change, but there are restrictions, with regards to compliance and infection prevention. But it'd be nice to have more of a balance of nature within hospitals and you know, like Heatherwick Studio, having having the building surrounded by plants and lots of view plants and greenery is definitely a great way of achieving that. So that's a good way of bringing nature in, is just by having great views towards it as well, and using natural materials inside. But obviously they have to be very easily cleanable and wipeable and robust.
Chris, any thoughts? Do you want to add any thoughts to
Yeah, I'm going off in a completely different direction. I agree with everybody, but you know, I think in a time of pandemic, you kind of got to go back to fundamentals. You know, you know, what I mean. I went to, I think, Maslow's theory of human motivation, and how does that apply to where we are now and what's changed? So Maslow, I think most people will probably be aware of the sort of pyramid of with you know, at the top autonomy and at the bottom loss of control. Where are we in that pyramid? And then we've got as designers,